We're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a two-part Sunday evening because of the length of the book of Job. And I debated about just picking one and running with it, but it's kind of hard to do that. So tonight, because of the nature of the book of Job, kind of ends on more of a, I don't know if you say a negative or just maybe not as quite a jump in your step kind of moment as the last part of the book. So just know that this is, I guess, from my childhood, it's like The Empire Strikes Back moving to Return of the Jedi. We're going to have kind of the difficult ending tonight, moving on to the better one next time. So just know that ahead of time, although I think we'll have some positive things towards the end. But the book of Job, where we are in our reading right now, is kind of the difficult part of that book. So Job is this pretty amazing guy from what we read about him, to put it mildly. This is the way Job is described at the beginning of the book. Job chapter 1, starting verse 1, says, "There is a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." And if you care about such things as the timing of this book or where Uz is or all that, we're not talking about any of that tonight. Feel free to research it. It's interesting, but it's not kind of the point of where we're at tonight. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people in the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. So Job's an interesting guy in the way that he lives and the things that he does and the way that he is described. And I love this, we obviously don't, as far as I know, get up and offer burnt offerings for our kids. But I would imagine a lot of you have been praying for your kids, for your grandkids, for years and years, for good decisions or for situations or for the people they may marry or all kinds of things like that. And so you can kind of understand what Job is doing here. Job has this concern of, well, what if my kids have messed up along the way? I want to make sure that we've done everything we can. And so he sacrifices on their behalf. So here's how we have Job described, just kind of in a few words. He is a godly man. Blameless and upright is the way we have it looked at. He fears God. He's a godly man. He is a wealthy man, so much so that we have it described that the amounts of the different livestock that he has and all of his possessions. He is a man who is loving of his family. He's so concerned about them that he offers these sacrifices to make sure they'll be okay. And then it describes him as the greatest man of the East. So he is someone who, it's not just that Job is living this way, but people know who Job is. So Job is one who, if we were all sitting at a restaurant today and Job walked through the door, everybody would notice Job walking in. And Job would probably be that guy that picked up your check. And Job would be the one who everybody knows the good things Job is doing around town. And when they drive around town, they would see Job's house and they would point out, well, there's Job's house over there. Things must be really good with Job. And if you understand that Job is a godly man, you begin to associate those things in your mind. That maybe the reason things are good with Job is because God is good with Job and God is blessing him. And so this is the Job that we're introduced to. And then there was a day, in verse 6, when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. This is another one of those many Bible questions I have in my mind that if we care about such things in heaven, I would love to understand a little better of exactly what's going on here. But these folks come before God, and they're presenting themselves, and here is Satan in the midst of them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" As if he doesn't know. But he says to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." And I think we get a little insight into Satan here too that's almost an aside to the story of Job, which is Satan seems to be someone who is looking for opportunity. And that's a pretty scriptural idea that we find in different places throughout Scripture where he's there just waiting for the chance, searching out the chance. So he's going around on the earth, just going to and fro. And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" So God understands about Satan that Satan is one who is probably critical of people who follow God, at the very least. And he says, "If you consider my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, the blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. So not only do we get this description of Job, that he is blameless and upright and godly and wealthy and great and all of these things, but now we have God himself affirming that. This isn't just what the world thinks. This isn't just what people think about Job. God himself says this is a good and godly, a blameless and upright man. And then Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. So the question, maybe in our words, might be something like, why is Job a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? What is Job's motivation? And if you've been in the auditorium class at all on Sunday mornings, Jet just finished going through Psalm 23 for the last several weeks. And he mentioned a week or two ago the idea of the prosperity gospel, which is not something we probably talk about a lot. In fact, somebody in class asked Jet if he would define that so we could better understand what it is. But it's basically the idea that people follow God and they feel like their life is going to be changed here on earth in a positive, usually financial kind of way. And so if we are people that fear God and we go to church and we do the things of God, then if we were not wealthy and important and all those kinds of things before, that God will do that because we're following him. And for those of you here, if you've been here a while, you've been here long enough to realize there are people here who are probably would be described as they're doing very well and prosperous and all that when it comes to the things of the world. And there are others of us who are not that, and everything in between probably. And the prosperity of gospel begins to fall apart when you realize, well, there seem to be some pretty prosperous people that have nothing to do with God, and some other not so prosperous people who really seem to be following God at their best. And how do we handle all of this? And so Satan's question is basically, what is Job's motivation? Why is it that he is trying to do the right thing? Why is it that he's a servant of God? And if you were blessed in the way that Job was blessed, and you felt like it was coming from God, wouldn't you be serving him too? I mean, doesn't that all just kind of make sense? So what is his motivation? Or maybe for us, the question might be, why do we serve God? Why are we here on a Sunday night in the middle of a bunch of storms? Why do we, as the plate goes by this morning, put something in there or do it online or however you go about giving? Why do we take the time to do the things that we do? Why do we put effort into the works and the ministries of this church? Why do we serve God? And I think if you were to look at Christians worldwide, you would see a lot of different answers to that question if people are being honest. Now, we would like to think that this is a selfless thing for everyone who claims to follow God. We would like to think it's just, well, this is what the Bible teaches, and so we're doing it, or because God loved us, so we're going to love him in return. We would like to think all those kinds of things, but sometimes people do that because of maybe fear of what happens otherwise. Sometimes people do that because they look at their life and they feel like, when I'm following God, it seems like things have been better than when I'm not, so I'm going to do it because of the result it gets me. The trouble with all of those things is, what if circumstances change? What if everything is going really well as you're following God, and then suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under you? Then what? Because if your motivation was, this is making life better for me, and I'm being more blessed financially or with importance or wealth or authority or whatever it may be, good health, then I'm going to follow God because look at what he's doing. But what about when some of those things slip out of place? And so this is basically what Satan has in mind here in Job chapter 1. So he says, God says, but stretch out your hand. Satan says, but stretch out your hand and all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. So Satan believes, or at least is very much trying to test the idea that, well, what if things change for Job? Or what if Job lost everything? I mean, he's described as wealthy and important, and we've got the numbers of all the livestock and all of those things, and he obviously cares about his kids because he's offering these sacrifices. What if you took all that away? And maybe a follow-up question for us is, well, what if we lost everything? I mean, you are here, you are Sunday night people in the midst of a storm. What if one of the storms that Butch said is not surrounding us, and I'm going to take him up on that, what if one of the storms that Butch said is not surrounding us comes through tonight, and your life is spared, but nothing else is? And you go down into your shelter if you have one, and when you come out, all you see is just flat around you. And your house that was there is gone, and your cars that were there are gone. And all of the things that seemed important today are gone. I struggle sometimes with, I get here and what if it hails while we're in here and it ruins our cars? And insurance will fix them or we'll sell them or it'll be fine, but those things that tend to be important to us, what if we took them away? And so Satan poses this question to God. And so the Lord said to Satan, verse 12, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Satan has a proposition. God says, all right, don't harm Job himself, but the things that he has, do what you will, and we'll see how this goes. So verse 13 says, "Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house." They're doing a lot of celebrating and eating and drinking, aren't they? "And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And if this was all that happened that day, wouldn't that be enough? To lose all of this just suddenly, and this one guy gets away to come and tell him about it. But while he was still speaking, there came another and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." You ever have one of those days where you make the mistake of saying something like, well, this couldn't get any worse, and then it gets worse? This is where Job is right now. So now another person has come to tell him about more loss, and while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And if I'm Job at this point, I'm thinking, no one else come tell me anything, because it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And while he was yet speaking, in verse 18, there came another and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And for it to be possessions and livestock and all of that is bad, but yet a man with the wealth of Job probably thought, we can recover from this. It'll be okay. But now when it's his children, those ones that he cared so much about that daily he was going out and offering sacrifices just out of concern of where they may be in their relationship with God, now they're taken away. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground. And how would people in our world complete this verse in their lives? How would we, as followers of God, complete this verse in our lives? And I would imagine most of us know someone who was at some point a follower of God, that something happened, and they don't complete this verse the same way that Job does anymore. It was just too much, they couldn't handle it, and they just felt like, I'm done with God now. But he tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshiped. I respect a lot what Greg does for a living in working with the funeral home. I don't think I could do that. I have to be around funerals a lot because of what I do. It's just kind of the nature of this job, not nearly as much as Greg does. At the same time, the thing I like about a funeral is this side of it, where maybe we sing a song that had meaning to that person in life. Maybe we go through some verses that comfort that person in life or are a comfort to the family, and we're reminded of there is something that happens in that loss that is mourning, but there's another piece of it that is worship. There is something about that moment where not only do we mourn the loss that we have, but there is a recognition of who God is. And so Job sees this, And he sees even in the midst of all this loss, and I am sad, and it is awful, that still I'm going to take time to worship. And then he says this, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. So I didn't come into this world with anything. I'm not going to leave this world with anything. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. In the midst of all of that loss, blessed be the name of the Lord. And can we go there in our minds? I love that Carrie and I were talking about the songs tonight, this morning, and he was trying to decide which direction to go. And I love the theme you chose of prayer, because there are so many moments in life where maybe this could be our prayer, whether they are good moments or bad moments. I thought of this morning, if you weren't here, we went through Psalm 136, the first part of it, and I read part of it, and then you responded with the line, his steadfast love never ceases, or I can't remember which version we read from. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his love never ceases, his steadfast love never ceases. And I wonder if maybe we would be served well by some prayer with those moments in them. Worked through spiritual disciplines with some people last fall, and one of the things we talked about was the breath prayer, which is not a very Church of Christ idea, but the idea is basically this: as you breathe, what if as you breathe in, it is something that God has done, and as you breathe out, it is blessed be the name of the Lord? Or as you breathe out, his steadfast love never ceases. And on it goes. All the things of life. And Job sees this in a way that he's never seen it before because of how life has gone. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Then chapter 2. And chapter 2 begins kind of in the same way that the thing began, with people, the sons of God coming before God, and then Satan is among them. And the Lord said to Satan again, have you considered my servant Job, in verse 3, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. God doesn't often say, I told you so, but this feels a little bit like that. All right, Satan, you thought if you took all his stuff away that he was going to change, and look, same guy. Have you considered him? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. So even though you wanted to take these things away, he is still with me. He is still blameless and upright. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man has he will give you for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Okay, so he has survived the test of his stuff being taken away, and even his kids being taken away. But if you were to take his health, then things would change. So what if Job's health is afflicted? Something be different then. And for you and I, maybe you're thinking through that in the first chapter. I think we'd struggle a little bit when we get to the kids there at the end of the chapter. But when it's all the stuff, you've probably lived at this point in life where you've had lots of stuff, maybe a point where you've had not so much stuff. There was a line in our wedding when we got married about sharing all our worldly possessions. I don't remember exactly how it was said. And at the moment it was said, we both started laughing because we were thinking, we don't have a whole lot of worldly possessions right now. My wife was thinking about her 13-inch TV at her house that was in different colors depending on the mood you're in. We didn't have a lot of stuff, and so if you were to take all our worldly possessions, we'd carry on. It'd be okay. But what about health? What if our health was taken from us? How would things be different? So what if Job's health was afflicted? What if our health is afflicted? And in this room right now, I'm sure there are people with health things going on that we don't even know about. Other people with health things going on that we pray about regularly. People whose families are affected. And it changes things a little bit in your mind because it feels so out of your control, and you desperately want the God that hears and answers prayer to hear and answer it in the way that you want it answered. And yet, what happens when health is afflicted? And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So again, all right, do what you're going to do, and we'll see what Job does. So verses 7 and 8, it says that Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Is there more miserable imagery than this? Here's this guy with these sores, and he's taking broken pottery, and scraping himself, just hoping for some sort of relief as he sits out in the ashes. And here is the guy who in the beginning of chapter 1 is so wealthy and so great and has all of these things, and now he is this. It seems like everything is gone from Job. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." Why would you still hold on to God at this point? And this, by the way, is the way our world thinks. They look at the evil that goes on in the world, they look at us having faith through difficult times, and they do not understand it. And they say, why won't you just be done with that and just live your life? Because clearly he doesn't care. And I will tell you, there are a lot of messages we can take from the book of Job, but he doesn't care isn't one of them. And it's easy for us to just look at this and try to rip it apart and feel like, well, this doesn't seem fair or right or any of those things. And yet, everything we know about God is that he is caring and he is loving. So his wife says, just curse God and die. But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak." By the way, I recommend never saying this to your wife. Bad idea. Not that I would ever do that. "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this Job did not sin with his lips. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" Now we, when it is not happening to us, know the answer to this question. But when it is happening to us, we don't like the answer to this question. And so we ask questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? Because we don't want it to be that way. Because if we were in charge, we feel like it wouldn't be that way. We would have a very obvious system where you're doing the good things and good happens to you, and you're doing the evil things and evil happens to you. And yet that is not the way in which our world operates. Should we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? So a commentary I was reading, I think it was the Preaching Word commentary, posed this as armchair questions or wheelchair questions. Not sure if I fully like the way this is worded, but I kind of like the thought behind it. The armchair question is, we can ask all kinds of questions and have all kinds of assumptions about things that are not happening to us. So, I mean, we hear of the armchair quarterback in our culture nowadays. You watch a football game and you see everything the quarterback should have done because, by the way, you're watching it in slow motion from 14 different angles while he's, behind 2 different lines that are all taller than him trying to get to him. And he has to make a quick decision, and you've watched it 4 times and said, well, how did you not see that guy? And my guess is if most of us had all that bearing down on us, we wouldn't either. Or maybe you're frustrated with the basketball game yesterday, which I understand, and you think, well, I would have done this or this or this. Or maybe when it's things of God, we think, well, I think it ought to work this way or that way. It's easy to ask the armchair questions. And then on the other side, there are the wheelchair questions, which is when it's you. When you're the one who is suffering, when you're the one who is going through the difficulty, when you're the one who does not understand. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the terminology. At the same time, I have a really good friend who's in a wheelchair. I've told you about him before. His name is Tim. We went to college together. I look at handicapped parking spaces differently now than I did before knowing Tim. Not that I was just constantly parking in handicapped spaces, but I just didn't think much of it before. Now, when I see them and I see how they're used or abused or whatever, I think of my friend Tim looking for a place where it's not even that he cares about being close to the front. He's probably more athletic than most of us. It's because he has to be able to get the chair out of his car, and there's got to be a space for that. And he sees it in a way that other people don't see. And every time I see a discussion about people parking in those spaces and everybody's got all the rationale about why it's okay, I think of Tim, and I think, you don't get it. This is an armchair question for you. It's not a wheelchair question. And for us, I think we prefer the armchair ones. I know I do. But at some point in life, the wheelchair ones come to most of us. It becomes a thing where it is our health, it is our family, it is all the things that Job loses. And then, how do we feel about God in the midst of that? Because it's easy for us to look at someone else and say, I can't believe the way they're reacting to this. And if it were me, I would do this or this or this, and then it happens to you. And then it's different. And so Job is in the midst of this, experiencing it all. Down in Job chapter 19, and between where we are in chapter 2 and chapter 19, there is a lot of back and forth questioning, which if you're doing your daily Bible reading, I'm not going to read it all for you, but he has these three friends that come in, and they are doing a great job until they open their mouths, which if you were ever in those moments of loss around people and you think to yourself, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say. That's why I don't want to be there. I don't have the right words. There are no right words. Your presence is it for the most part. And if you're just there and say something that doesn't try to solve it or make light of it or whatever, and that's what his friends do initially, and it's great. And then they start trying to explain it. And we know from what we've read in chapters 1 and 2 that Job is blameless and upright and good, and nothing about that has changed, and everything about his life has now changed around him. And so they all assume, well, Job must have messed up. We don't know what he did. He sure is being secretive about it, whatever it is. And I don't know why he just doesn't confess it. And so there's this back and forth with Job. And what I notice as I'm reading through the book is a lot of Job's more negative moments. We hear about the patience of Job and the wisdom of Job. It's not all flowers with Job going through these chapters. There are a lot of moments where Job asks some really hard questions. And a lot of moments where maybe faith would not be the first word that comes to your mind when you're describing what Job is saying and what he's doing. And so much of that seems to come on the heels of his friends and their accusations. But there's a back and forth. And always in the midst of it all is Job still acknowledging God and who he is. In chapter 19, verses 25 through 27, he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives." Wouldn't for so many, if you really knew you had done nothing wrong and all of this had suddenly done a 180 in your life, for a lot of people, wouldn't there just be that question of, is God gone? I mean, what's he doing? Why is all this happening the way it is? Doesn't he care? And Job says here in chapter 9, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has thus been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself. And my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. I know that God lives, and that I will see him. And regardless of what else happens in this life, he and I will be together." As we talked about in Bible class this morning, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I know that I am with God, and he is with me. I know that my Redeemer lives. In the New Testament, as we draw this together, the beginning of the book of 1 Peter, Peter says this in verse 6, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." I don't know, as messenger after messenger came to Job, if he would have described that as just a couple messengers. I don't know, as he sat on the pile of ashes with pottery trying to get some relief from these sores on his skin, if he would have felt like that was just a little while. And I don't know if the things that you are going through in your lives right now, or people that you love are going through, if the way you might think to describe them is just a little while. But that's how Peter describes them. That these trials and these tests are happening for just a little while. That I may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. We want to have a genuine faith, but a genuine faith is going to be tested by fire. And that's not always going to be a pleasant experience. You notice a lot of the imagery in Scripture about us kind of puts us just at the mercy of others, of God, whatever it may be. And we are kind of the object in the midst of all that. It's a testing that goes on in our lives. A genuine faith is tested by fire. It is a faith that is resilient. And to have a resilient faith requires that there is struggle. It is the nature of being resilient people. Our God loves us, cares for us, but that does not mean that everything about this life will be easy, that there won't be difficult things that come along, and how will we face them? And as I said, this is part 1 of 2. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler, just in case you have never read the book of Job before. Things get better. And generally speaking, that's kind of the way of things. I don't know what's gone on in your life right now, but you've probably had things in the past that have happened that you just thought were just the worst things could ever be, and things tend to get better. But even if they don't here on this earth, we have a promise that things will get better for us as we live in eternity with God. That God loves us enough that he has sent his Son to die for us. Tonight, if you have never followed him, this is not the most upbeat of things, and I don't believe for most of us it will be like the life of Job, but it could be. Because the way things go in life all the time is not the reason that we love God. That is not our motivation. We love him because he loves us. And we want to be with him and dwell in his house forever. If you've never followed him, you can be baptized into him tonight. Your life can be changed, and maybe you can begin to understand why Job had the faith that he did. And you can begin to build that kind of faith in your own life. Or if those things in life have come to you and they feel every bit as big as what Job has gone through, and you just don't know what to do, know that God would like you to be drawn back to him and wants you to be with him, and wants to be your God, and for you to be his people. If there's some way we can help you tonight, please come while we stand and sing.